Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss the important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and today we are connecting with DORA, Colorado's Department of Regulatory Agencies. We love to have them on once a month to discuss the various agencies that I guess, support our businesses in the state of Colorado. I have Jill Sarmo here. She is the Investor Education and Public Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Regulatory Agencies, Division of Securities. Hi, Jill.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thanks for being here. And we'll also talk with Alyssa Garden-Schwartz. She is the Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection in the Colorado Attorney General's office. Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tammy. It's great to be here.
Now, a little more background. Alyssa oversees all consumer protection enforcement and outreach activities from the Attorney General's office, including those related to consumer fraud, charity fraud, antitrust, consumer credit, and debt collection. And before she became the Consumer Protection Deputy, Alyssa led numerous investigations and prosecutions involving violations of state and federal consumer protection laws. She has practiced with the Colorado Attorney General's office since 2007, and prior to that, worked at law firms both in Denver and Washington, D.C., and started her career with the U.S. Federal Trade Commission Bureau of Competition. I didn't even know that was an agency.
Yes, it's actually a very, we partner with them a lot on what we do. So, yeah.
Great. So, Alyssa, thanks so much for joining us today. You know, this is the first time we've ever had the Attorney General's Consumer Protection section on the show. Tell us a little bit about what your office does.
Sure. So the Consumer Protection section, its mission is to protect consumers and businesses from fraud and to maintain a fair, competitive business environment here in Colorado. And so we really go about that in two ways. First, and maybe the most obvious, is that we hold back bad actors accountable. So that means that we enforce various state and federal consumer protection laws, including the Colorado Consumer Protection Act, the Charitable Solicitations Act here, state and federal antitrust laws, as well as laws related to consumer credit and lending, debt collection, debt management services, and mortgage fraud. So that's a big part of what we do, and as I mentioned earlier, we will sometimes partner with other state attorney general's offices as well as federal agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to enforce laws because oftentimes we're dealing with folks that are not just operating in Colorado, but they're operating nationally, and so it makes sense to partner with other folks that are seeing the same things that we are in Colorado.
Are these kind of I want to say like scams and some of these other things that we see, are they more prevalent now? Because I feel like, you know, you get the strange phone calls.
Right.
Specifically through your cell phone, right? That you know, either they're threatening you with a warrant for arrest or they're from some hotel offering you resort points, and you know you have nothing to do with them. I mean, is it just overwhelming now?
You know, I think the reason that it feels overwhelming is because the technology to make those calls has really allowed scammers to use auto dialers to just keep dialing consumers and see if they can get somebody to pick up the phone and engage, right? And so going back to sort of what our office does, a big part of, in addition to the enforcement that I mentioned, what we do is we try to have a pretty robust education and outreach program so we can inform consumers about those types of scams as well as other common scams so we can empower consumers to protect themselves. And the sort of the centerpiece of our outreach and education initiative is our website, stopfraudcolorado.gov.
Right.
And you can go there and see a wealth of information on common scams like, you know, the increase that you're seeing in folks calling you and pretending to be, for example, the IRS or the Treasury, or sometimes even folks are calling and pretending to be the court and telling you that you missed you were supposed to report for jury duty and you missed your opportunity, and now they want either payment, a fine of some sort, or they want your personal information to verify that you in fact did miss jury duty. So I think a big message to all the listeners out there is beware of folks that are trying to get your money or your personal information, because that's where the scams that we're seeing these days are really focused.
So are those the most common scams you receive complaints about? Are there others?
Well, so yes, we receive, especially this time of year because it is tax season, we do receive a lot of complaints about imposter scams, in particular the IRS, folks pretending to call or pretending to be the IRS and call and say, you know, you owe money, and if you don't pay us immediately through some sort of prepaid debit card or a gift card, or if you don't wire us money, we're going to send somebody to your door to arrest you. And it's important to note that the IRS will never call you without sending a letter first, at the very least. And they will certainly never call you and threaten to arrest you. And they don't take gift cards, prepaid debit cards as payment.
Well, that's good to keep in mind, because in the moment it can seem very official and very real. So yes, those warnings, they will never call you without first contacting you by mail.
Right.
And they're never going to ask you to go secure a debit card.
Right.
To give them.
Right.
We laugh, but it's very convincing when they do it.
It's very convincing, and I've gotten these calls myself, and I've even gotten these folks leaving messages on my cell phone, and and saying, we have a warrant for your arrest. You need to call us immediately and give us money, or give us a credit card number. So that's, I think we've seen a fair amount, we see a fair amount of those scams being reported on a regular basis, but there is an uptick in this time of year.
And I think, just to jump in really quickly, we were talking about how we kind of laugh about those scams. I think one of the things that I hear and that we at Dora hear a lot from people is that, they always say, when we go out and try and do education about this, how do people fall for these scams? It's so ridiculous. Who would think that you would send, a gift card to the IRS? But what they rely on is that people don't actually take the time to reason through the fact that it doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's why they use tactics like fear and urgency, or, prize winnings, things like that, and all these different varieties of scams. It's because they want people to just that emotion to kick in and sort of override that reason, and
yeah, something akin to flight or fight, right?
Exactly. It's a very similar reaction. And then by the time your brain has caught up and you've actually reasoned through it, sometimes the money's already gone. So
yeah,
right.
Go ahead.
No, I think, Jill, that's an excellent point. And it's capitalizing on that fear factor or the excitement factor, right? Like, we also see a lot of reports on we'll call them fake check scams, where you're sent a huge check in the mail and told that you won a lottery or a sweepstakes, or you qualify for a government grant program, and you're sent these checks, and the goal is to get you to cash the check, and then the folks will call you back and say, oh, you know what, we sent you too much money, we need money back. But it's capitalizing on that excitement of, oh, I've got a chance at free money here.
Yes. And you have to look at it very scrutinize.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to
Absolutely,
say.
Yes.
But so Jill and Elisa, you bring up a great point, because I've had some of those calls, and someone threatening with a warrant for my arrest, and I started out with like, so are you going to show up at my home or at my work, because I want to be there,
right? Right.
And they're like, you're not listening. And I'm like, no, I think I have a valid question. And I've always wondered why they keep talking. Once they realize you're not falling for it, why they keep talking. And I think you clued me in, because they just need to convince you.
Yes.
They just need to convince you and get you really concerned and panicked enough to go along with their scheme.
Yep, that's exactly right. See if they can really trigger that panic mode so that you're motivated to give up money or personal information.
Right.
And the other part of it is, and I know, again, this is especially true for people that cold call regarding like investments or things like that, that we'll talk about a little bit later, is the more they talk to you and the longer they talk to you and the more you're giving them information about yourself, even if you think, oh, I'll never send money, I'll never do this,
Right.
I'll never fall for it. The more information you're giving them, the more they're learning about you and able to actually know how to kind of push your buttons.
Yes.
Because a lot of these guys, not all of them, but a lot of them are pretty skilled at talking and, being convincing. And so the more information they have about you, the more they can kind of, maybe try and push some of those emotional
Manipulate.
buttons.
Wow.
That's right.
Interesting. So you mentioned the great work that Stop Fraud Colorado does in the area of consumer education. What types of resources does that program provide?
So, in addition to our website, we have, and I want to mention too, and we can talk a little bit more about this later, but so we have lots of content on our website. We have our own content. We often link to content of other folks like Dora and the Federal Trade Commission, who have fantastic resources of their own about common scams and how to protect yourselves from scams. We also have a consumer line, 1-800-222-4444, where we have folks available to answer calls and talk to you about your complaint. So, as I said, this is sort of the centerpiece of our outreach and education. We also have social media accounts. You can follow us at Twitter. And I'm, of course, blanking on our Twitter handle. I think it's Stop Fraud
CO.
Stop Fraud CO, right?
Actually handle.
Stop Fraud
CO.
has an amazing, I gotta say, their social media for any business people out there, small business people or other agencies that are out there listening. If you want the kind of blueprint for how to do a really well done and robust social media, Stop Fraud is definitely up
On
there.
point, huh? Great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Pass that along to Holly. She does a great job manning those accounts. So in addition to, and we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube also. So, but we look for opportunities to engage with the public. For example, we have done in the past teletown halls with AARP Elder Watch. We have a partnership with them, and what we do is we engage in sort of, or really AARP engages in outbound calling, right, to the folks that are usually picking up the phone if there is a fraudster, a fraudulent telemarketer on the other line, but instead they're picking up and they get invited to a teletown hall with the folks from AARP and folks from our office. I know that we've had Dora on those calls before, and we answer calls from people have the opportunity to pose questions, to call in with questions on those teletown halls. We'll give them some general information about a particular topic that we've selected for that day. So that's another big thing that we've been doing in terms of education outreach. We have publications that are available. You can go to the Stop Fraud Colorado website and look at those publications. You can order them in bulk as well. We've got an identity theft repair kit. We have a military consumer guide. We have it's a little late now, but we do have a holiday guide that we have. And some of these, I know that our identity theft guide as well as our holiday guide are both in English and Spanish.
Oh, wonderful.
And we also have resources for businesses as well. Again, sometimes there are resources, sometimes we link to resources from other organizations, but we have information on how businesses need to think about keeping personal information safe so they're not susceptible to breaches, data breaches. We also have resources for business identity theft. So, just like an individual's identity can be stolen, so can a business's identity be stolen.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yes. So we have those actual physical resources that you can order from our website. But again, and one last thing I do want to mention, because again, this was a great partnership that we had with DORA and other agencies around the state. So November, we did our first ever Colorado Consumer Protection Month, where we engaged in, I think it was 4 teletown halls. We did some chats on Twitter. We worked to really raise awareness of consumer protection issues and consumer fraud throughout the state during that month.
Wonderful. We appreciate all those efforts to get the word out, and like I said, you are doing a great job informing folks how to avoid those scams. But we know that people do still fall victim. Can you tell us what's the easiest way for someone to report a scam?
So again, they should definitely come to our website, stopfraudcolorado.gov. We have buttons all over the website, report fraud.
Really?
We
Great.
have
Wow.
a general reporting form. We also have some forms that are specific to certain types of fraud. We have a relatively new feature that we started called Tell Us Your Story, which allows folks, if they don't want to go through sort of the more detailed form that we have for reporting fraud, they can just give us some very basic contact information and an overview of the issue they experienced.
Synopsis, right?
Right. And again, also, if folks would rather not deal with the internet, they are more than welcome to call our consumer line, 800-222-4444, and report fraud that way. And those consumer complaints are really important. They help guide our enforcement as
Sure.
well as our education and outreach initiatives. A lot of times we get complaints that we know we can't necessarily do anything about, but for example, it's a licensing issue that DORA should be looking at, or that something that the Securities Division in DORA is better suited to look at. We refer to other agencies throughout the state, and again, throughout the country, really. We make sure that consumers are getting the information that they need.
And I know, just to sort of step in here, I speak with you guys in your office a lot about how you track those calls, both Stop Fraud as well as the Elder Watch program with AARP does a really good job of sort of tracking, how many calls they get on certain types of scams. And then, they release bits about kind of what are the top scams that they encounter and what kind of comes up at different parts of the year. So I know that you talked a little bit about the IRS scam and the tax fraud, but I always think it's interesting to see kind of what like the top 5 are. So I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think we should be, since it is National Consumer Protection Week, I think we generally release a list here pretty soon of our top 10 complaints. So, I mean, really, if I'm remembering correctly for this year, it is the number one complaint, and it's almost always the number one complaint every year is debt collection calls, concerns about fraudulent debt collection calls that could be phantom debt calls where people are
phantom debt?
Sounds scary, right? It is scary.
Yeah.
People are calling and saying that consumers owe money that they've never owed.
Never owed. Because I was wondering if it was like it's something I've paid off already and it's still hanging out there. They think they're going to convince me, but never owed.
No, so phantom debt is never owed. Zombie debt is debt that you may have already paid off, but that seems to, or it may have been written off, but somehow has gotten back into the system and has gotten picked up by a debt buyer or another debt collector, and you start getting calls about a debt that you've already paid off.
Yes, and for that reason, I always, whenever something's complete, I say, please send me. This is paid in full, and I need a copy of it. So should something, because I've had friends where that happened. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
I would say for me, as far as the phantom debt goes, I don't know, if it's related to demographics or my cell phone number, I don't know, but I get a ton of those calls about education debt, about
Really?
school. Yeah. And, I always know, like, I know where I am with my student loans, but that's a really big one is I have people calling and threatening, because I haven't paid off a certain debt for education. So,
Yeah, I had a friend that paid his off, and then like 2 more times they came back and said, no, you still owe this much. You still owe this much. That's why I came up with my idea.
Yes, it's a good idea.
Give me a paid in full, and if this comes up again, we're not talking. So
Right, that's right.
yeah, but tell me more about phantom debt.
So yeah, I mean that again, if somebody calls you and says that you owe them a debt, I mean you should ask. You should ask for documentation, right? Say if that's the case, then you need to send me the information that shows that I owe this debt.
Exactly.
You should not be shy about asking people to verify the claims that you're making. But again, don't fall victim to, well, give me your social security number and I can verify that this is in fact the debt that you owe me, because again, these are opportunities. What fraudsters are looking for is money or personal information that they can monetize down the line. So you have to be careful about giving both out to strangers, right?
Yes, and I've had that call many times, because apparently there were a million Tammy Schmidts in America, and they all owe something to somebody. And so I'd kind of verify that last 4 digits of your social. But now talking to you, I realize don't even do that, because if they could have some other numbers, they might put it together.
That's right. That's right. That's why it's important to remember, like, people are not just looking for your money, they're looking for your personal information.
Wow.
yeah, I'd say that by far is the easiest trap to fall into.
Because you think that's safe, but I can see now that they're trying to put a puzzle together.
Or you just don't necessarily even realize how much information you're actually giving over to somebody.
Yes.
I mean, again, they're really skilled at talking, kind of smooth talking a lot of the time. And so they're getting information on you, whether you realize, you're giving it or not, the longer you speak to them. So,
Right. That's right.
yeah.
So we know that reporting fraud is important because it could lead to litigation from your office on behalf of the state. How do you determine what cases to bring, and any examples?
Sure. So I talk about it being more art than science, right? I mean, but
Really?
there are certain, I mean, again, going back to consumer complaints, that really helps us figure out where our priorities should be. And it's looking at, not just the volume of complaints, but it's also looking at the pattern, or if patterns come up in reviewing the complaints and ensuring that that's something that we're the best office to address versus a DORA or a federal agency. So it's we obviously look at the impact that that's happening to Coloradans, right? But oftentimes we'll get tipped off by a news report or some other source of information about a practice that sounds particularly egregious, or that's being perpetrated by somebody who we are aware of in the past. Cases that we've brought recently, we actually just started sending out money in a settlement that we made with a company called Oasis, which is doing business as Law Cash. This is a company that offered loans to folks that had been in car accidents or had been injured and had pending litigation. And the idea was that they would advance money to these consumers, and then once the consumers recovered, either through settlement or judgment, that they would owe the money plus some additional amount back to the company. We had a dispute as to whether or not that constituted a loan, and thus was required to comply with our interest rate caps and other laws governing lending in the state of Colorado. Ultimately, it was determined by the Supreme Court of Colorado that those did constitute loans, and then we ended up settling with the company. But we were able to secure about $2.3 million for consumers. So that money is being sent back as we speak.
Wow, perfect. Thank you so much for handling those cases. We're talking with Elisa Garden-Schwartz, the Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection in the Colorado Attorney General's office. We're glad to have you here. And stay with us. We'll talk more with Jill Sarmo, with the Investor Education and Public Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Regulatory Agencies Division of Securities. Stick with us. We have a lot more coming up. Thanks so much for staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. And today we're connecting with DORA, Colorado's Department of Regulatory Agencies. And now I'm talking with Jill Sarmo. She is the Investor Education and Public Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Regulatory Agencies Division of Securities. Jill, you're here today along with Alyssa because DORA, and particularly your division, does a lot of collaborating with her office and the Stop Fraud program, I should say. So can you tell us a little bit more about that partnership?
Sure. Well, I think alongside the outreach and education side of the partnership that we have, that kind of grew as a natural sort of addition to what we already do with the Attorney General's office, which is that the Attorney General's office actually represents DORA and most specifically the Division of Securities in a lot of our cases. So when we conduct an investigation that's typically based on a consumer complaint, an investor complaint, something along those lines, and we find some type of wrongdoing and want to initiate disciplinary action, whether that be through a civil suit or sometimes a criminal action. Most of the time, the Attorney General's office is actually who we turn to help represent the commissioner in those cases. So because of their involvement and the fact that we already kind of had that collaboration with a lot of our cases, it made sense that we work together on the prevention side so that, hopefully we actually kind of limit some of the work that our investigators and our attorneys have, to cut down on some of the fraud that we see. And with my division, since I'm with securities, we see a lot of specifically investment fraud. And so that's a section of the Stop Fraud campaign that they focus on. And so we're able to find a lot of new and interesting ways to collaborate.
So your division has a bit of a more narrow focus than the Attorney General's office when it comes to consumer protection. What are some of the common schemes and frauds that you see when it comes to investing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, generally financial fraud is a big concern for both of our agencies, and where the Stop Fraud program can talk a lot about things like the IRS scam, debt collection scams and things like that. Our purview is a little bit more narrow in the sense that we are, mostly investigating and looking at investment fraud. And so I kind of put together a list of things that I could talk about today in terms of some of the most, common things that we see. The first one that I think a lot of people aren't as familiar with is something that we call affinity fraud. Mm-hmm. And it's a piece of a lot of our cases. So I think the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority recently conducted a study of people who had fallen victim to investment fraud. And of the people that they surveyed for this study, 70% of the people said that they had gotten advice for investments from family or friends or a business contact, and they had never actually talked to a licensed advisor about it. They hadn't run a check on the investment or on the person who was pitching it to them, just because they trusted the advice of a friend or family member. And so a case that we had, I think since the last time I was here, was a guy named Daniel Sullivan, who was actually a Jefferson County Sheriff's deputy, and he got kind of just involved in investing as a side project, and he was investing in real estate and making lots of deals, and he was telling his coworkers during all the time he was learning about this how much money he was making and everything he was learning. And so eventually he kind of was like, oh well, why don't you let me handle your money and like your retirement and your savings, and I can make you a lot of money in these companies. And so he had a lot of coworkers that ended up handing over a lot of their savings, some of them a good portion of their savings to him to invest. And basically what ended up happening was he commingled their funds with his own personal funds, and so was spending money that wasn't his, while at the same time a lot of the investments that he was actually making were losing money. And so with the help of the Attorney General's office, after we invested the case, they prosecuted it, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison for that. So
wow.
Yeah, so I think, that's just one of the things that we always caution people about is it's so easy to be sitting around the table at drinks, happy hour with your business
Sure.
associates, or, you're at a holiday dinner with your family and somebody starts talking about, again, I think the hot topic recently has been cryptocurrency
Sure.
and, things like that. And, oh, I'm making so much money and, I want you to get in on this too because, you're my friend or my family member. And so, people, again, it's that sort of overriding of your rational
Yeah.
thinking to say, well, if they're making a ton of money on it, then I should get in on this too. And so then they don't do their proper due diligence to get in
Right.
and check and make sure that something's legitimate or that the person who's handling their money actually, is licensed to do so and has the qualifications to do it.
Just to add to
Sure.
the cryptocurrency piece, we found out recently that the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission has just put out some educational resources
Yes, I just
on,
saw that today.
yes, on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, just some, sort of basic primers on what those are, but also talking about how those can be used really as parts of common, to what I think they're called pump and dump scams,
Yes.
right? Using a new form of currency. So I mean, those look to be good resources if you want to have more information about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin.
Yeah, and just to repeat that, so a lot of people are less familiar with the CFTC than the SEC, but it's the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. So
Okay.
it's cftc.gov. And yeah, they did just put together some really great educational materials. And I think, the cryptocurrency is something that regulators a little bit we're still scrambling to catch up with it because it's
Right.
moving so fast. But, again, I know, personally in my circle, there's a lot of conversation going on between friends just about even what it is and whether it's worth looking into. And so, yeah, I think it's a new iteration of an old trick that a lot of people use in order to get people to hand over money.
Right. I know you had one more case you wanted to give reference to there. This was this one involving insurance?
Yeah, well, that was just another example I had of that sort of, people taking investment advice from people that aren't necessarily qualified to give it.
Sure.
So this case is actually still pending, but it was a guy who he was actually setting up insurance companies, and he would have seasoned insurance agents go out and recruit kind of newer guys that didn't really know the ropes quite as well, and then they would basically in the process of setting up these companies would tell these new insurance agents that as part of their job they needed to push investments in his companies. And so basically what they ended up doing was, again, like I said, these are all still allegations because the case is still pending. But the Division of Securities investigation found what we're alleging was $16 million in securities fraud. And there were over 200 investors that have been involved in this throughout the country, but mostly a lot of them have been in Colorado and Wyoming. And so, it's one of those things where people were having insurance agents pitch them investments, and that's not like a dual licensure
No. Yeah.
situation. And so a lot of these insurance agents, again, were also getting in trouble because they, or could potentially have gotten in trouble because they had no business soliciting or selling
wow.
investments to
Right.
people, and if they didn't hold the proper licensure. And so, again, it's just one of those situations where when you have somebody telling you, about an amazing way to make money, you need to make sure that it's legitimate. Because what ended up happening was the agents that were selling them and pitching them weren't licensed, the securities weren't registered, and now, it's kind of a little bit of a mess. So,
What about investment fraud involving real estate these days? I mean, everything's booming, and I can see where as a buyer you're like, is this really what it's worth, or how would you know?
yeah.
And you may have another side to that.
I think, that's exactly it. The reason why we're seeing so many investment specific frauds related to real estate right now is just because people think, oh, like, the real estate market is booming. There's no way that I can't make money on this. There's no way that this isn't going to be a lucrative deal for me. And again, it's that excitement over the amount of money that can be made that sort of people don't slow their roll
Right.
and they don't take the time to, to think through something. So we have a couple cases right now, but one specifically was a case where a guy was convincing or had unlicensed agents, again, that were out there, unlicensed advisors, that were convincing people to roll over their IRA and 401k assets into these real estate investments that weren't secured, that, they were promising high returns, they were promising no risk. And in the end, basically the person who owned this investment company, again, the division is alleging that he was actually out there putting his girlfriend and his secretary and his wife and himself up in these luxurious homes that they were living in for free. There was evidence of luxury goods, cars, things like that that were all paid for with investor money. And so, I think the message that we're constantly trying to push with people is that a simple phone call to the Division of Securities or to Stop Fraud, they can send people our way if it's a complicated or a specific question about an investment, but simply checking to say, is the person who's selling me these securities licensed, or, who's pitching me this investment, do they hold a license? Is the investment itself registered if it needs to be? And those are questions that we can answer at DORA and at the Division of Securities for people. And if they would just take that little step, again, it's part of the message of DORA's Take 5 campaign.
That's what I was
Take
just gonna say.
5 minutes and make a phone call. And you can save yourself a whole lot of trouble. And for, some of these people that lost their 401k or their IRA, I mean, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
But that's good advice to at least, if something sounds really good, too good to be true, probably is, and that next step is like, okay, is this person authorized to make me this offer? Is this person authorized to take my money and do that? So yeah, that Take 5 to get wise.
Yeah,
what you're promoting right
take
now.
5 minutes. It really doesn't, take too long and it's not a huge inconvenience to just do a little bit of homework, and that little bit of effort can end up saving a whole lot of heartache and pain.
Yeah.
And that really, and by the way, I think maybe you want to change your slogan to slow your roll, because I like that.
Yes.
I like the Take 5 campaign, but I like slow your roll.
Slow your roll.
But I think that is very much an overall message in how to protect yourself from fraud, from scams, is really, and because, as we were discussing earlier, they really are tuned in on getting an emotional response, whether it's an investment opportunity, even in charity fraud cases, right? Those are emotional appeals too. Those are that somebody that's giving you a call and saying, hey, there are people starving in Africa, or there are, homeless children that desperately need your money. And fraudsters are counting on consumers not taking the time to really think it through, to do their research, to do their homework. It's such an important message in fraud prevention. It really is.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. That I must get a lot of phone calls because I'm relating to that one as well. And some of those you feel bad about. They're like, oh, would you like to contribute to this campaign or this cause or contribute to that? And I will usually ask like, well, can you give me a website to learn more and I'll handle it from there. And then you don't know if it is legitimate, if you feel bad for taking it that other direction.
But that's a really good point because, again, I think a lot of times too, when you hear people that are critical of victims of fraud, they think, oh, they were just being greedy. And that's not necessarily always the case, that people were being greedy and wanting to make money or something like that. They prey on people, they pull on people's heartstrings too.
Yeah.
And so, there's the other side of the coin where sometimes people are thinking they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They're thinking they're doing something helpful. And again, just that failure to do that quick check, to make a phone call to a government agency or somebody that can verify,
Right.
Would have been all it took.
Right.
So Jill, you're promoting the Take 5 to Get Wise campaign. What's in the works for this consumer-focused project this year? How will we see this roll out?
Sure. Well, it's actually really good timing that we're here this week, that both Alyssa and I are here this week. One of the projects that Stop Fraud Colorado and DORA partner on, and that is actually promoted and was started by the Federal Trade Commission that Alyssa mentioned, is National Consumer Protection Week. And so that is this week. It is typically the first full week of March. And so that's the time that Dora, not only do we collaborate with a lot of our partners and try and get out and do a lot of, consumer facing education and outreach, but we also at Dora roll out our Take 5 campaign, kind of refresh it every year. And so some of the things that we're doing this week, also with Stop Fraud, we have a chat that's happening on Twitter on Thursday. It's Thursday at 1 p.m. and it's at the hashtag MILCHAT, so MILCHAT. And it's something that Stop Fraud does with the FTC on a regular basis. And we like to jump in and look at where we can participate as well. And this week is a perfect opportunity because we're doing common scams that affect the military. So that's a really good way for people to just kind of, again, if you're eating lunch at 1 p.m. on Thursday and you want to jump on Twitter and just watch the conversation unfold, there's a lot of great agencies that give good information. And then, yeah, for Take 5, again, we've got our website that we're refreshing this year. It's askdora.colorado.gov. And you'll see our Take 5 owl. He's our little mascot that's on there. And so he's always got lots of good information for people on all different types of things. So not just when it comes to investments and money, but also with questions for insurance, licensing, for all different types of professions, whether it be in healthcare or in home repair, and things like that. And so, yeah, we're just really trying to get the message out there again, just to reiterate, it really doesn't take too long to make sure that you're armed with all the tools you need to make the educated decision about where you spend your money.
Great. That's also a great platform for Dora to kind of gather momentum for those outreach activities that you mentioned. I think you also said you're going to speak on cybersecurity and some other issues.
Yeah, so that's, again, another collaboration that we have with Stop Fraud that we've done. Last year we did it in April, and I believe it's coming up again. They do sort of a small business seminar series, and so we've spoken on cybersecurity there for financial businesses, because, again, all of our business people and our licensees, they're dealing with Dora in the sense that they have to come to us to get their license and their certification. But we also recognize that they're consumers too, and even businesses are consumers of services. And so we put together a cybersecurity program that Stop Fraud has been kind enough to showcase, where we kind of teach our licensees about how to protect information for their clients and for their own business. And so again, we're kind of trying to pull from all different areas and do education for all different types of, both consumers and businesses alike, because at the end of the day, scams and fraud target both.
Right. And some of the businesses need to know what kind of scams and fraud are targeting their customers.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing for anybody listening out there today. I know you guys have a really big audience of business people. And so, yeah, it's important to stay informed about the types of things that are targeting customers, particularly. Again, another big thing for us is elderly. The senior community is a huge target for scams, and investment scams as well. So,
any new developments there of any cases coming up or recently resolved?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to jump in really quick, or do you have anything?
No, I mean, I did want to mention in conjunction with Consumer Protection Week, we are doing one of the town halls that I mentioned earlier. We're doing that tomorrow with the Attorney General. And I think it's at 10:30 tomorrow morning. But in terms of cases, we do have a case recently that did end up sort of disproportionately targeting seniors, and it was a case where a company was installing furnaces and air conditioning units without pulling permits. And that resulted in one of the folks that we had testify at the preliminary injunction hearing on this case was an elderly woman who almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning as a result of her furnace being improperly installed. And so I don't, that case is, so we just, we obtained a preliminary injunction that prevented the guy from running the business to continue running the business. And then we just recently completed a trial on the merits, as we say. And so I don't want to comment too much on it because it's still pending, but that's a case where we did have some senior victims. Generally speaking, we're, as I mentioned earlier, we have our partnership with Elder Watch. That's been in place, oh gosh, I mean, I think it predates my time in the office, so I think it might be around 12, 15 years old.
Wow.
But through that program, we really seek to educate seniors about frauds that are targeting them specifically and how to protect themselves and how to, again, to empower themselves and their friends to not fall victim to those scams.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Jill.
Oh, and I was going to say, and we have our Senior Safe program with the Division of Securities that I know I've been on here before to talk about. But yeah, it's pulling, not only educating seniors, but also pulling in our financial community and the people that are out there working with seniors on a daily basis as clients to really watch for those signs of seniors that may be falling for different types of scams, frauds, and also exploitation by family and caregivers. So.
And is there legislation being considered for that?
Yes, since the last time I think I was on here, we have passed a mandatory reporting act for our financial licensees. So all investment advisors and broker representatives now are mandatory reporters for elder financial exploitation and abuse. And if they see it going on, even if it's not related to investments or securities, they still should give us a call. There's a reporting form on the DORA website that they can fill out, and then we pass it along to the proper authorities. So
what kind of red flags would they look for?
Yeah, so it's just, we've had quite a few reports that have already come in as a result of this legislation taking effect in July. And so, some of the things that we've seen in reports that have come in so far are, a new family member that's all of a sudden calling an advisor or a broker and asking a lot of questions about the person's finances and saying, oh, I don't think that they should be handling this anymore. But there hasn't been an actual conversation that's taken place with the senior. And if somebody's trying to, again, it's that gaining access to personal information and financial information about a senior, and they're trying to go get at it through a third party, which in the case of a lot of our licensees is through an advisor. That's a really big red flag for them and something that they know they're going to need to watch with a person. So.
I'm talking today with Jill Sarmo. She's Investor Education and Public Affairs Coordinator for the Department of Regulatory Agencies, Division of Securities, and also Alyssa Garden-Schwartz, the Deputy Attorney General for Consumer Protection in the Colorado Attorney General's Office. So having you both together has been just a fantastic conversation of seeing how DORA helps businesses and consumers watch out for these potential fraud and different scams, and the Attorney General's office in helping to prosecute them. So it's great to hear how you're working together. Do you want to tell us anything else or other ways you're working together?
Yeah, I think, just to mention to people, again, I'll throw in another pitch for Colorado Consumer Protection Month since we're in Consumer Protection Week. We're going to be doing that again next year. It's a really great campaign where we can work together and try and get a lot of information out all at once to consumers and put as many resources out as possible. And then just our social media, I think we're really trying to get to people. Again, it's that in the spirit of Take 5, as you're browsing Facebook or Twitter, just to take a minute and click on what we're posting and see what new scams are out there, what trends we're seeing in terms of enforcement. Again, Stop Fraud's Twitter handle is at StopFraudCO. And then Dora's is at Dora, D-O-R-A, Colorado, all spelled out. And then you can find us on Facebook as well. And we're just kind of really trying to shift and put a lot of focus on those platforms because it really is an easy to digest and quick way for people to check and get good tips on how to protect themselves.
Right. And if folks are on social media, already, and we're seeing more and more scams being perpetrated through social media too, take time to go to our sites to, follow us on Twitter and get some good advice about how to avoid those scams.
Yeah. It's definitely all information all of us can use, so we do appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jill Sarma from DORA and Alyssa Gardenschwartz from the Colorado Attorney General's office. We really thank you for joining us on the show today. Great information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.